Hey, Ray here from websiteprofitcourse.com. One thing I hate about the online business world is how many bad marketers there are out there. And when I say bad, they're successful, but they prey on beginners' desire to uncover some secret that's going to make them a ton of money. And if you go to research them, they've not published one thing out there on the internet that's helpful. It's all behind their course. And when you've been around long enough, you realize that life is a lot more complicated than that. And thankfully, I've come across a lot of books and people that I followed along the way that have pointed that out. And today I want to share one of those documents that probably is the biggest bang for your buck. It's called The 12 Laws of Life, and it was written by this guy, Tom Hubiar, who I actually don't know much about him, but this was recommended by another guy that I was following years ago called Perry Marshall. So number one is that self-management and people skills are the keys to your success and happiness. You know, everybody tells you about how important education is and that if you're smart enough, you're definitely going to have success in life. But in my experience, I've noticed that the people who do have people skills, who are good with just the simple things like conversations, storytelling, and that type of thing, they tend to have more success, and this is especially true in the business world, both if you're a small business owner trying to sell a product or a service, or if you're in the corporate world and you have the ability to make relationships with your higher ups that help get you promotions down the road. Maybe subconsciously I denied that for the first handful of years out of college, but I've definitely come to understand that through dealing with my local clients. And one line in here that I really like is, most people limit themselves by their unwillingness to consider personal change. I definitely believe this is the case, especially nowadays with social media. It's a very negative culture out there. You get a lot of people complaining, and then when things go wrong in their own personal life, they tend to blame others. Now, the first part of this self-management, I think I've always been pretty good with this, at least in terms of how to stay organized. That's one of the things that the education system really did drive home in me. I always had a planner or a calendar. I never missed homework assignments. I was that kid. So that's never been a problem. But sometimes that higher level goal that you have, that all the tasks on your calendar are leading up to, and the motivation behind why you want to do it, that can sometimes wane or come and go in waves. That's where I think discipline and habits come into play, which I know we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes here. Number two, you are at the center of your universe. And here he's talking about two types of centeredness. To me, the inner centeredness sounds a lot like meditation. He talks about looking for your best self, finding peace of mind, connecting to something beyond you, and keeping your mind clear. But one thing I do really like that he says here is that until you're connected to your core, you won't be very good at handling the rest of the world. And he does mention prayer and meditation here. Now, for the outer centeredness, he talks about setting personal boundaries. This is something that I always struggle with because I'm an agreeable person. I like to help people, so it's really easy for other people to derail my day based on my own personality. I have to create these boundaries in order to stay productive and in order to get the things done in the way that is most sustainable for me. And when it comes to working with clients, I think this line can apply to a lot of people. Allowing others to invade your boundaries will destroy your personal freedom and subject you to their tyranny. And I know people have felt that either with a boss or with a bad client. And then he flips this and says that if you cross other people's boundaries, you become codependent with them and you start caring more about how they live their lives instead of how you're living yours. Number three is another one of those touchy subjects. What you think about most is what you get. He mentions the law of attraction here. And if you remember that cheesy movie, I think it was back in the 90s or maybe early 2000s, The Secret, that's what they talk about. Now, they do it in a much more scientific way, as though if you do this, you will become a millionaire. So they're kind of like those online marketers that I was talking about at the beginning. However, I think that the core of this is true. Most people that are in a negative situation, they dwell on that longer than they should. And because their mind is always focused on the negative, that's what is manifested in their life. If they focus more on the positive and positive actions that will get them out of it, they're obviously more likely to get out of that situation. I mean, it just kind of logically makes sense. And so one thing he says here, it's a good idea to choose your habitual thought patterns carefully. This is where I think social media is driving people crazy. I really think it's causing mental illness and just instability in people because they're slaves to the algorithm and what's being put in front of them, and that's kind of programming what their mind is thinking about. And I know personally, I feel worse when I spend the most time on social media, and I feel most productive when I'm working on my own thing, learning new things in a positive manner with a positive mindset, versus reacting to everything else that's going on in the world outside of me. And the advice that he gives here is practice the skills of optimism, gratitude, generosity, and forgiveness. I think a lot of people can work on that. Number four, this is the one that I think has stuck with me the most. It's about the importance of habits. You make your habits and then your habits make you. I know one thread throughout all my WordPress tutorials and what I talk about with web design freelancing is that you have to do these things every day. You know, you don't have to dedicate 4 to 8 hours every single day to learn something new. But if you do it every day, it's going to be in your working memory. And if you don't do it every day, you're going to forget about it. You're going to be less likely to do it the next day. And then each time you go in there and try and learn something new, you have to refresh on what you learned before. Whereas that's kind of your starting point when you're doing something daily. And I think the opposite of this is true in a lot of cases where you can really improve your life if you don't focus on adding new habits, but you just focus on the top 2 or 3 bad habits that you have, because everybody has them, something that they want to work on, but it's part of their daily life that's just hard to take out, whether it's smoking, spending too much time on social media. A big vice of mine has always been food. And I think something that he mentions here that I really like is that you can do anything you want on a schedule. Most people think that it's too hard to add something into their life. And I like this example that he gives of getting on a plane, because chances are if you're going on a vacation that you've been looking forward to, there's no chance you're going to be late to that. So this all comes down to a matter of priorities. So one way that I implemented this in my life, I should say 2 ways, is that after I read this and a handful of other things, I decided that I wanted to use a calendar and use it religiously. It makes your life easier when you can offload that stuff and plan in advance, and then you just wake up and do what's on the schedule as opposed to thinking about what you have to do. And the other thing is, if I want to focus on something, I generally focus on it first thing in the morning. When I wanted to get my health in order, I started with diet. I changed my morning routine around that, along with what I ate throughout the day. After about a year, once I had that in order, I focused on working out. So first thing in the morning, I would get up and do a workout before I did anything else. And I think that's a good way to just knock it off the plate really early in the day, because the later you get in the day, the more obligations you have, the more chances of distraction, and the less likely you're going to do it. And if you're interested in using a calendar, I created an entire video about how I track my time and all the different little tips and tricks that made it a lot easier. I'll link that up in the top right. Now, I have one small area where I tend to disagree with him, and that's the time to acquire a habit. I do agree with the statement that changing your life doesn't take a lot of work. It is more so doing it daily as opposed to the difficulty of the work on that one specific day. But he says do it for 3 weeks and it'll become a habit, and now you stack them on every 3 weeks. For me, it took me more so 6 to 12 months to truly embed a habit into my lifestyle. Like I just said with diet, it took me about a year to feel comfortable with what I was eating, and more so push away the desire to eat crappy foods. And I've struggled with that pretty much every single year. Wintertime is always tough because I'm less active. And then you have the holidays. So all that kind of combines to me gaining weight and going back to my bad habits. And I got to recorrect that. And it becomes a lot easier to correct when you have a year under your belt versus 3 weeks. But this is also the number one reason why I realize those online marketers are just BSers, because they talk about how quickly you can get to $10,000 in passive income. And I'm here to tell you that's just not going to happen. It takes a lot of work in forming habits to really change your life, and that takes time. So when you think about that as it translates to business, focus on getting $500 a month, and then focus on getting $1,000 a month. Those are the kind of stepping stones that you need. If you think you're going to go from 0 to 10,000 in a month or two, that's kind of on you for unrealistic expectations and buying into a dream that doesn't exist. Now, I'm just going to do a couple more here because I don't want to make this video about a half hour long. But just again, I will link this document in the description below. Number 6, obligations are a fraud. Once again, because I'm an agreeable person, this is the type of thing that I feel. It's really hard for me to say no to somebody when they invite me somewhere, when they ask me to do something to help them, when they email me, when they call me, when they text me. It is in my nature to want to say yes to everything. So this is another one of those that I have to constantly work on. Here's another big one. Number 7, expect less from others and more from yourself. I just think this is important to mention because it's so easy to get let down by people when they say no to you. You also take that personally. It's kind of like the inverse of the last thing we talked about. And so much gossip goes around when it comes to this kind of thing. And he says here, don't get bitter if somebody else didn't keep a commitment to help you. It's a waste of time to criticize them and a bigger waste to pay attention to anyone's criticism of you. And he puts the onus back on you. You have to get better at doing things on your own. And that's a lot easier than getting somebody else to change. And I found this to be extremely true, especially if you're trying to change somebody else's habits. That's just not going to happen. They have to make that decision for themselves. Here's another sobering one. There's no happily ever after in the real world. I think this is one of those things that people believe money covers. And obviously, there are certain problems that money can buy your way out of, but everybody has problems, whether it's relationship problems, health problems. Maybe they're not living their authentic life. They're putting on some kind of facade. They're going after the wrong goals. You have to celebrate the good moments and enjoy them and know that they're pushing you forward, but you're always going to encounter struggles. And he mentions here again that you have to live intentionally. You have to have a plan for every day where you choose your goals, you write them down, and you track them daily. And I like this line also, your life will happen by accident unless you have a plan for it. And I'll close with the last one, number 12. It's never too late to change. This is one thing that I've always thought about, and it's, again, so stupid and obvious, but everybody has the same amount of time in the day. You don't have the same circumstances, you don't have the same intelligence, you don't have the same skills, but you do have the same amount of time. And as we go back to the other things we talked about in this video, it all starts with those daily habits, the small habits that you stack on top of each other to get to the place that you want to go. And too many people give up at some point, whether it's just on one specific goal or really in their entire life. And really, it all comes back to that simple decision. You have to fully commit as opposed to just thinking it would be nice if my life was like this, but then you don't actually change those daily activities. So I think when you read something like this, it really puts it into perspective and helps you wade through all the shortcuts that you think exist to the life that you want. And in a way, it is freeing because you realize that it's in your control. It's just going to take a little bit longer than you think. But the beauty of it is that once you start that daily routine and once you really embrace the habits and they become a part of you, they do become easy. Now, the dark side's always there. I think if you had a bad habit at some point in your life, there's always a chance that you can fall back into that habit. So that's what you have to constantly guard against. Once again, if you'd like to check out this document, go look in the description below where I'll link it up. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. And if you have any stories about any of these that we talked about today, leave it in the comments below. Now, this was a different kind of video, but please subscribe to my channel if you like future WordPress tutorials or videos on web design freelancing. That's been the niche where I've applied some of these tips that I've learned. And if you do want to dive deeper on the technical side, I'll link up a few tutorials on the left here. Thanks for making it to the end, and I hope you put something into practice today to start that momentum.